Chapter 5. The Influence of the New World. 1. 1492 and the First Cycle of American Metal Influence. The year 1492 represents more than a navigational achievement. It marks the beginning of a profound metallic revolution, one that would shatter the medieval economic order. When Christopher Columbus set sail, his primary motivation was clear: the pursuit of gold. To the Spanish crown, gold was the bloodlight of the state, necessary to fund the reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula, to consolidate royal power. The initial encounter with the Caribbean islands provided a small but intoxicating glimpse of this wealth. The native populations possessed ornaments of high-purity gold, gathered from local alluvial deposits. This first cycle of American metal influence was characterized by systematic plundering of existing indigenous treasures and the establishment of primitive placer mining operations. The impact on the European mind was instantaneous. For centuries, Europe had suffered from a bullion famine. The scarcity of gold and silver limited economic growth, kept prices stagnant. The arrival of the first Spanish galleons laden with American gold acted as a massive monetary stimulus. However, the influx was initially a trickle compared to what would follow. In these early decades, the gold was not yet integrated into a complex global market. Instead, it was used by the Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, to pay off debts to Italian and German bankers, to finance the initial infrastructure of the colonial empire. This period also witnessed the birth of the mercantile illusion, the belief that a nation's wealth was measured solely by the quantity of precious metals within its borders. Spain's obsession with hoarding New World gold led to the implementation of the Quinto Real, the Royal Fifth, a tax that ensured 20% of all extracted metal went directly into the royal treasury. This centralized control over the flow of gold allowed Spain to become the most formidable military power in Europe. But it also sowed the seeds of a massive inflationary phenomenon, soon to be known as the Price Revolution. Archaeologically and historically, this first cycle is marked by a tragic irony. The gold artifacts of the Taíno and other indigenous peoples represented centuries of cultural and religious heritage. They were treated by the conquistadors merely as raw material. Thousands of masterpieces of New World goldsmithing were cast into standardized bars to facilitate transport and accounting. This destruction of art for the sake of currency illustrates the brutal pragmatism of the era. In the 16th century world, the utility of gold as money far outweighed its value as a cultural monument. 2. Statistics of production. The influx of gold and silver, 1493 to 1660. The magnitude of the discovery of America cannot be grasped by narrative alone. It requires a cold analysis of the numbers that redefined European solvency. Between the first voyage of Columbus in 1492 and the mid-17th century, the global stock of precious metals underwent a seismic expansion. The production of gold and silver in the New World followed a trajectory that can be divided into distinct statistical waves. In the first phase, 1493 to 1520, the influx was primarily gold, harvested from the Antilles, but this was merely a prelude to the silver flood that began with the conquest of Mexico and Peru, which paradoxically exerted massive pressure on the value of gold itself. According to the records of the Casa de Contratación in Seville, the estimated total of gold and silver that entered Spain legally between 1503 and 1660 reached staggering proportions. The annual average production of gold rose from approximately 5,000 kilograms in the early 1500s to a peak that sustained the entire Spanish imperial machine. Yet the ratio between the two metals caused the most economic turbulence. In 1493, the ratio of silver to gold in Europe stood at roughly 10.5 to 1. By 1560, as the Potosi mines in Bolivia reached full production, the sheer volume of silver began to cheapen that metal, driving the ratio toward 13 to 1, eventually 15 to 1 by the 1600s. This statistical explosion created what historians now call the price revolution. With more metal chasing the same amount of goods, the purchasing power of the gold florin or the Venetian ducat began to erode. This was not a localized Spanish problem. It was a continental contagion. As the Spanish crown used this new wealth to pay for its endless wars in the Netherlands and Italy, the bullion was dispersed across Europe. Statistics show that by 1600, prices in Western Europe were on average 3 to 4 times higher than they had been a century earlier. This inflation permanently altered the social contract. Landowning nobles on fixed rents saw their wealth evaporate, while the rising merchant class who traded in the new gold amassed unprecedented power. Furthermore, these statistics reveal the hidden cost of the New World's bounty. The extraction of these millions of ounces of metal relied on the mita system and other forms of forced labor, particularly in the high-altitude mines of the Andes. The Golden Age of Spain was, statistically speaking, a period of immense human suffering. From a mineralogical perspective, the purity of American gold, often exceeding 22 carats in its native state, allowed for a higher quality of coinage than the European mines could offer. This technical superiority, combined with the sheer volume recorded in the Seville ledgers, ensured something remarkable. For nearly 2 centuries, the entire world's monetary policy was dictated from the mountains of the Americas. 3. Spain's role as the great distributor of precious metals. By the middle of the 16th century, Spain had become the wealthiest nation in Christendom. Yet it functioned less as a reservoir and more as a conduit for the world's precious metals. The gold and silver arriving at the docks of Seville did not remain in the Spanish coffers. Instead, it flowed outward with a mechanical inevitability, one that defied the protectionist laws of the Spanish crown. This phenomenon occurred because the Spanish economy suffered from a premature industrial decline, burdened by the sudden influx of wealth. As prices rose within Spain due to the price revolution, it became cheaper for Spaniards to buy manufactured goods using American gold. Textiles from the Netherlands, grain from France, luxuries from Italy. Consequently, Spain became the great distributor, inadvertently fueling the economic development of its rivals. The primary driver of this distribution was the relentless military ambition of the Habsburg monarchs. To sustain the Holy Roman Empire and fight the religious wars of the Reformation, Charles V and later Philip II borrowed astronomical sums from international banking houses, the Fuggers of Augsburg, the Genoese financiers. These debts were serviced and repaid in American bullion. The gold of the Incas was essentially pre-sold to German and Italian creditors before the galleons even crossed the Atlantic. This systematic export of specie meant that while Spain held the mines, the financial centers of Europe held the real power, using Spanish gold to build the foundations of modern commercial capitalism. Furthermore, the legal attempts to prevent the drain of gold through draconian export bans proved utterly futile. The economic magnetism of the Antwerp and London markets was far stronger than the threat of the Spanish executioner. Smuggling became a sophisticated international industry. Gold bars often disguised or hidden within legitimate cargo to bypass the royal inspectors. This leakage was essential for the rest of Europe. Without the Spanish distribution, the continent would have remained in a state of deflationary paralysis. The gold that leaked out of Spain provided the liquidity necessary for the Dutch East India Company and the English merchant adventurers to launch their own global trade networks. Ultimately, Spain's role as a distributor highlights a fundamental economic paradox. The possession of the source of gold does not guarantee national prosperity. By the time of the Spanish bankruptcy in 1557 and 1575, it was clear. The Golden Age of Spain was a hollow brilliance. The metal had merely passed through Spanish hands to enrich the artisans of Bruges, the bankers of Genoa, the merchants of London. In the long history of currency, this period serves as the first great example of something important. How gold, once released into the global bloodstream, follows the laws of trade and supply rather than the decrees of kings. 4. The mercantilist theory and the quest for national treasure. The massive influx of American bullion did more than just inflate prices. It gave birth to a new economic philosophy that would dominate European statecraft for 2 centuries: mercantilism. Under this doctrine, the power of a nation was no longer measured by its piety or the size of its noble class, but by the absolute quantity of gold and silver held within its borders. Gold was viewed as the sinews of war, the only reliable means to hire professional mercenary armies, build naval fleets, maintain a centralized state. Consequently, the quest for a favorable balance of trade became an obsession for European monarchs who viewed international commerce as a zero-sum game. For one nation to gain gold, another must lose it. Thomas Munn and other early mercantilist theorists argued that a kingdom must behave like a frugal merchant, exporting more than it imports so that the difference is paid back in gold. This led to highly protectionist economies, where the export of raw materials was banned and high tariffs were placed on foreign luxury goods. In England, the Navigation Acts were designed to ensure that gold remained within the British orbit. While in France, Jean-Baptiste Colbert established state-run industries to produce goods that would draw gold from rival nations. This era transformed gold from merely a medium of exchange into a strategic national asset, leading to the birth of the modern national treasury. The pursuit of national treasure also became the primary driver of colonial expansion. If a nation lacked mines on its own soil, it was compelled to seek them overseas. The mercantilist logic dictated that colonies existed solely to provide the mother country with precious metals and raw materials. This led to a series of global gold wars, where the British, Dutch, and French fought for control over the Caribbean islands and the trade routes to the east. The monetary policy of the 17th century was essentially a struggle for the metallic remains of the Spanish Empire. Every merchant ship captured and every new merchant outpost established was a victory in the relentless battle for bullion. However, the mercantilist obsession with hoarding gold often led to economic stagnation. By restricting the flow of metal, nations frequently suffered from a lack of internal liquidity, which ironically hindered the very commerce they sought to promote. It was during this period that early thinkers began to realize something crucial: that gold's true power lay not in its storage, but in its circulation. Yet for the kings of the 17th century, the sight of a full vault of gold remained the ultimate symbol of security. The mercantilist theory thus set the stage for the next great evolution in the history of gold: the realization that the metal's value could be amplified through the invention of credit and the birth of modern banking. 5. The price revolution and the shift in global power. The final and most enduring consequence of the New World's gold was a fundamental restructuring of European society, triggered by the phenomenon known as the price revolution. As the volume of gold and silver in circulation tripled across Europe within a century, the value of the currency itself plummeted. For the common laborer and the feudal lord alike, the world suddenly became exponentially more expensive. However, this inflation did not affect all classes equally. It acted as a massive redistribution of wealth. Those whose income was fixed by ancient custom, primarily the landed nobility who relied on stagnant feudal rents, found their economic power evaporating. In contrast, those who traded in commodities and handled the new gold, the emerging merchant class, the bourgeoisie, saw their influence soar as the nominal value of their goods rose with the tide of inflation. This economic shift signaled the death knell of feudalism. The traditional knightly class, unable to afford the skyrocketing costs of armor, horses, and mercenaries with their devalued silver rents, lost its military and political monopoly. Power shifted from the countryside to the cities, from the castle to the counting house. This was the era when gold became democratized through trade. The gold that was once locked in royal crowns and cathedral altars began to flow through the hands of cloth merchants in England and shipbuilders in Holland. This new liquid capital funded the rise of the nation-state, providing kings with the means to bypass the nobility and govern through a professional bureaucracy paid in coin. Furthermore, the price revolution altered the global balance of power.
Spain, despite being the source of the metal, suffered the most from the curse of abundance. By failing to invest its gold into domestic production, Spain exported its inflation along with its bullion, eventually sinking into a state of imperial overstretch and bankruptcy. Meanwhile, nations like England and the Netherlands possessed no mines but excelled in commerce. They captured the gold through the export of finished goods. The shift in the center of gravity from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic was thus a direct result of how these nations managed the golden influx. The Atlantic powers became the new architects of global finance, laying the groundwork for the first central banks in the colonial empires of the 18th century. In conclusion, the influence of the New World's gold was a double-edged sword. It provided the spark for the Renaissance and the scientific revolution by funding exploration and intellectual exchange, but it also caused widespread social displacements and endless bullion wars. By the time the dust from the price revolution settled in the mid-17th century, the medieval world was gone. Gold had redefined what it meant to be powerful, shifting the mandate of rule from divine right and land ownership to the cold, hard reality of accumulated capital.